Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today I'm going to be doing a brand new original tag, the Trick or Treat tag. This tag was created by Heather at Heather Reads and by Meg at Books Off the Beaten Path. And I was tagged twice. I was tagged by Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics and by Leslie at Books, Gers, and Purrs. There are only two prompts, and each one invites us to speak about 5 books. The first prompt is tricks, and the prompt is simply to pick 5 books which you have read that did not turn out to be what you hoped for, like getting candy, but it's not the kind you like. Tell us the reason this book didn't work for you. And then the second prompt is treats. Pick 5 books that you have read that were the best reading experiences you've had, and explain why. Now, Heather was in costume for her video, but she said it was not necessary for anyone doing the tag to get dressed for Halloween, but certainly people are welcome to wear a costume if they so choose. As Heather did, I am also going to do the tricks first because I would rather end my video on a positive note by talking about the books that were treats for me. So a couple of books that I'm going to consider tricks. And I don't actually have copies of all of them because a few of them I've given away. But the first one that I will talk about is Star Trek Volume 1, A Chilling Journey Through Worlds Beyond Imagination, adapted by James Blish. I was really excited to come upon this book, and I have a couple others in this very, very early series. In the summer of 2024, I participated in Book Trek for the first time, and that was a 3-month reading event surrounding the reading of Star Trek fiction. And I had found, I think maybe 6 of the James Blish very early adaptations of the original Star Trek series. This first one, this volume 1, this was originally published in 1967 when the series was brand new. Bantam Books published a series of these novelizations starting in 1967, and they went into, I think, the earlier or maybe mid 1970s. And James Blish, who's a terrific science fiction writer, he wrote, I believe, 12 volumes in these very early examples of Star Trek fiction. Initially, he was paid $2,000 per volume. This first one, which I read, I was so happy to find this. And I read it because the original Star Trek series is the one that I really remember. I mean, I remember when this was a new show in, the mid 1960s. But Blish was writing from drafts of the scripts. And these were not even necessarily the finished scripts that were used for the episodes. And then what he did was he took each script and he kind of adapted it into a short story. So this first volume is actually just a collection of 7 short stories based on the very first season's episodes. And they're just not, it's just not a very good collection. This is nothing like the complex narratives that are, being written today as part of the Star Trek fiction. I'm glad to have a bunch of these James Blish, original volumes. As I said, I think I have 6 of them. I'm glad to have them, and I'm glad to have read this one for historical purposes, but they're just not great writing. And this is not, I don't think, the best example of James Blish's science fiction writing either. Okay, so that's my first trick. I was happy to have it, happy to read it, but not really thrilled with the book itself. The next one is probably going to be a little bit more controversial, and that is Stephen King's novella from 1983, Cycle of the Werewolf, with illustrations by the great Bernie Wrightson. Now, why do I consider this a trick? I was also really, really happy to come upon this book for the spooky season. And I don't remember this book, from the 1980s. It's one of Stephen King's earlier works. And I don't remember this, when it came out. It is the basis. This novella is the basis for the 1985 film Silver Bullet. I remember when that came out. I don't remember this book coming out in the early 80s. There's so much to like about this, and I was really liking it until a certain point, which is what I'm going to talk about. And it is, it's a terrific read, especially for the spooky season. It's set up like a calendar with each story, and it's really a collection of 12 stories, all revolving around the people living in this one town. But each story represents a different month when this monstrous werewolf is terrorizing the people of a fictional town in Maine, Tarker's Mills. It really is a terrific novella to read, especially right before Halloween. I love the hero of this collection. I'm not going to say who that is. The artwork is absolutely magnificent. So what's my problem with this book? Why am I calling this book a trick instead of a treat? Well, this is very early Stephen King, and early Stephen King clearly had some hang-ups about body weight, and in particular, body weight in women. I don't notice this being an issue in his more recent works, and I've been kind of reading around a little bit in Stephen King of late. I don't notice that as a concern that he's still writing about. But in this very early work, he writes really cruelly about people who are heavy. And in this work in particular, he writes about an overweight woman in a way that I found really disturbing. One of the werewolf's victims early on is a woman who is repeatedly described as a lonely, overweight woman who is sending herself Valentines because really, what man would desire her? And then he goes on and on to emphasize her excess weight as she is lying in, she's described as lying in her narrow virgin's bed. And then he goes further where he has her actually willingly accepting the, vicious attack from the werewolf. She's described as finding, everyone else is terrorized by this werewolf who rips them, limb from limb. But this overweight woman is described as finding the werewolf as, quote, somehow not unpleasant. And she whispers lover to him as he descends upon her and then tears her limb from limb. I don't think Stephen King in his 70s is still writing about women in this way, but he was writing this way in his 30s, and it really colored how I felt about the rest of this book. Okay. Third is a book that I don't have anymore because I donated it to my library. I've talked about it recently on the channel. My in-person book group recently read Lauren Groff's Fates and Furies, a book that I talked about a great deal on the channel when we were reading it and after we finished it. This book was regarded widely as one of the best books of the year that it was published. Slate, NPR, The Washington Post, all kinds of publications listed it as a best book of the year. And I have loved everything else that I've read by Lauren Groff, but this novel did not work for me at all. It describes the marriage of a couple, Lotto and Mathilde, from their college days when they meet, through their getting married and their marriage, and we get the story of the marriage from each partner's perspective. But I so disliked both of these characters that I just found reading the book to be really painful. Mathilde is a sociopath, and Lotto is just a full-blown narcissist. And it was very hard to read, 500 pages about two characters that I just found, so unlikable. They're selfish, superficial people in a very, very unhealthy relationship. And I just couldn't bring myself to care about them. And most of my book group kind of felt the same way. It was just a painful reading experience. And most of our reading experiences aren't really like that. And then my last two kind of go together, and I don't have them either. I donated them as well. With the I'm with the Band book club, we read Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses and A Court of Mist and Fury. And we did so because she had come out on a list published in the state of Utah of, I think, 13 writers that were being removed from libraries and school libraries. I absolutely defend Sarah J. Maas's right to write her books, and her books should be published, and they should be available. But I just, they were not for me at all. I read all of A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I participated in the online discussion of it. I just couldn't get through A Court of Mist and Fury, and I abandoned it about 200 pages into it, and I gave both books away. I didn't see what the big deal was. I didn't see why they have been removed from libraries all over Utah. I didn't see what was so objectionable about them. Obviously they're not for little kids, but anyway, when we got into the second book, I just thought I've done my part for Sarah J Maas. I DNF'd the second one, and I donated both of the books. So those were my tricks. Now on to my treats. These are some of the best reading experiences that I've had recently. One is part of a group of books that I've talked about a great deal over the last year, and that's Claudia Piñeiro's Elena Knows. And this was part of the Piñeiro Project, where we read 7 works by Claudia Piñeiro that have been translated into English. I can't say that I loved every one of the 7 books, and I've actually done a video where I kind of put them in a ranking order. I definitely loved Elena Knows. But the whole group reading process was an incredibly powerful experience. And we, everyone in the group, I think, agrees that, it was just a really meaningful and important exchange that was taking place for several months. It was an ongoing project, and certainly one of the best reading experiences that I've had since I discovered BookTube. Another book that was a super powerful, meaningful reading experience for me was the reading of Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet. I have really loved everything that I've read by Maggie O'Farrell, but the reason that this was so powerful for me was that it was a book that brought me out of the only reading slump I can really remember ever having in my life. And I've talked about it before on the channel, that when I first retired from teaching, I found myself with all the time in the world, and suddenly I was unable to read. I couldn't quiet my mind. I couldn't focus. I just would drift. I would drift away, and I couldn't finish anything. I couldn't focus on anything. And I read Hamnet while listening to an audiobook, and that's the first time I had ever done that, and suddenly I regained my ability to read, and I was able to shut out all of the noise, that was coming from the school where I used to teach, and from, all of my dear friends that I had left behind. There were a lot of things going on in the school that I was no longer a part of it, but I couldn't quiet the noise that was coming from there, and this is what did it. So Hamnet and Maggie O'Farrell will always have a special place in my heart. And it was right after that I discovered BookTube, which I then watched for about a year, and then decided to make my own channel. So I see all of those things as being somehow related. Another super powerful reading experience was Adrian Tchaikovsky, Children of Time, and this was a buddy read that I did with my friend Lekton at Reading from the Depths. I had been reading around quite a bit in classic and vintage science fiction, but not so much in contemporary science fiction. And this was the first Adrian Tchaikovsky book that I read. It was the beginning of my foray into more contemporary science fiction, and it was an absolutely incredible reading experience with Lekton. So that one will always be near and dear to my heart as well. Next, I would say my reading of Anthony Trollope's The Warden, which was the first Anthony Trollope novel that I ever read. And I read this with Jack at Spread Book Joy. And this copy, this edition of the book was a gift to me from my dear friend Debs at Rainer Reads Stuff, after I had said that I thought I was the last person on earth to read Anthony Trollope. This just opened up an incredible new world for me. And Trollope has written, I don't know how many novels he's written, so I've got, this just wealth of literature to explore now. After that, Jack and I, for Victober, we also read Barchester Towers, and we're pretty much committed now to reading the Chronicles of Barsetshire over time. We're going to continue to read those together. But new discovery of an author that somehow escaped me. I can't explain it, but I'm so glad to have found him now. Okay, let's see. I talked for a very long time over the course of at least 3 months about my recent reading of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, a book that I said here on the channel I would never read. After I reread Ulysses for the 3rd time last summer, I said, I'm done for now. I will never read Finnegan's Wake. And then I did. I joined a group that was reading Finnegan's Wake. And while I still make no claims to really understanding what this book is about, I'm not sure that I understand it at all, except that it feels like you're moving around in a dreamscape. I had this incredibly powerful group reading experience, and I also personally had this very deep, immersive reading experience where I read Anthony Burgess's book about Finnegan's Wake. This is Here Comes Everybody, an introduction to James Joyce for the ordinary reader. And I also read Joseph Campbell's A Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake. And I read William York Tyndall's A Reader's Guide to Finnegan's Wake. And I read Richard Ellman's famous biography of James Joyce. So I really went all out, and I read all of these books, and I also watched videos on Finnegan's Wake, and I listened to readings of Finnegan's Wake. It was a totally immersive experience, and what a powerful experience. It's one that I'm still, hoping to recreate with some other great book that will warrant that kind of immersive reading experience. So those are my tricks, and those are my treats. This was really fun. This was a great tag. Thank you, Leslie and Alan, for tagging me. Thank you, Meg and Heather, for creating this tag. If you're watching and you want to get some tricks or treats in before Halloween, I hope you will consider yourself tagged. And then, as I always do, I'm going to tag some people in the notes below. So, as always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.